For a CEO panel, not surprisingly, we have 3 CEOs to talk to today. And what I'm going to do is start and ask them each to give you a quick 1-sentence positioning statement for what they do. The chairs have been rigged with ejection seats, so if they go long, I have the remote over here. So you want to start it off?
Yeah, good morning. I'm with ExtraHop, and ExtraHop is a real-time analytics company to monitor and secure hybrid enterprises, as a one-liner.
Excellent.
Wow, that had to be.
No pressure.
That was brief. Okay. Kristina Bergman, Integris Software helps companies understand what data they have in order to comply with all the new data privacy laws like GDPR and CCPA.
Good job. 1 sentence.
Hi, I'm Samir Bodas, co-founder and CEO of Icertis. We are a contract management platform in the cloud. I think GeekWire named us or called us the Salesforce of contract management.
All right. So all 3 of our CEOs are building companies here in the Seattle area, and I thought we'd start and just talk about what's different about Seattle. What's easier to do here as you build your company? What's harder to do here?
Yeah, sure.
Start us off.
The good thing is that we are in a city which is a cloud mecca, right? So if you are building a cloud business, then no better place than to be in the Seattle, because one, you have access to talent, and also you can develop a pretty good ecosystem working with the large CSPs around here. For ExtraHop, it's a little bit different because our whole cloud and SaaS endeavor is aimed at specialized departments within enterprise because we are a security company. And the talent, even though one would assume that there would be a lot of that here in Seattle, and I was talking with Charles earlier, at the senior level, people who understand the enterprise aspect of software business are a little bit difficult because the focus in Seattle outside Microsoft and AWS is a little bit more on end-user SaaS products. So that becomes a little bit challenge for us on the talent side.
Great. Kristina?
So +1 on all of that. The thing I would add is we found that people generally tend to be risk averse, both the investor community and employees, much more so than the Bay. So my dirty little secret is I used to be a VC before I started this company and spent pretty much every week down in Palo Alto and San Francisco. And it's interesting, the recruitment process and the things you need to consider in recruiting up here. We found that we'll get people to the finish line, excited about the offer, ready to join the company, and then their partner will say, nope, we're not. We've got kids that are about to go to high school or university in 3 or 4 years. You're not doing a startup. You're going to stay at Microsoft. You're going to stay at AWS. You're going to stay wherever you are. And so we found that recruiting here requires not just you selling the candidate, but also their spouse. Whereas in the Valley, it's not unusual to see both the candidate and the spouse both doing startups. No big deal. It's just kind of part of what they do. And so that's been interesting in terms of how we approach recruitment and how we approach conversations and what we need to think about in terms of benefits packages, even at a very, very early stage, is having really competitive healthcare packages, because that becomes an objection extremely early on if they're leaving one of the big companies. And I would say that conservatism is typically echoed in the VC community as well. Lots of VCs in the Bay will swing for the fences and huge valuations on basically vapor. Whereas here, they want to see something. They really want to see substance. They want to see something that's a little bit more mature stage-wise than what folks in the Valley are looking for. So I've just found it's a much more conservative kind of a climate.
Yeah, and to build on that a little bit, the positive aspect of, I guess, risk averse is that if you are building a startup for the long game, it's going to be a decade before you're going to be a really big software company. And if that's what you're focused on, then you attract the talent that wants to play for the long game, as opposed to 2 years later you flip and now I'm out of a job and make some money. So that's the positive aspect of it. From the VC perspective, I would defer a little bit. We got our Series B from Ignition, and we're a reasonably small company. We got a Series A from Greycroft and Fidelity, but we saw them lean in. We saw them substantially lean in, and it was a long time ago. Gosh, 3 years ago. It all depends on the sweet spot of the partner. The partner, John Connors, is on our board, knows the space that the startup is in, is comfortable within, then I guess they lean in substantially, even if it's early stage. But we have had great success with VCs also and also talent.
I think as Samir said, it also depends a lot on the partner. I mean, we have Madrona who has invested in ExtraHop and have been a great partner, guide, and coach, and helping us become a successful company. But at the same time, the Bay Area VCs are very aware of our company and other companies, and I think I shouldn't say, but 20% of my time is just to fend off the VCs and the bankers who just have seen our performance and want to give us money. So I think the money is available. Yeah, it's a good problem. So money is available, but I would like to see more VC firms here. I think that will give confidence to the
The
entrepreneurs.
financing question is interesting. Seattle tech ecosystem loves to beat itself up about availability of local VC. GeekWire writes that story every 6 months, every 12 months. All three of you have raised money from both the Valley and local VC. Be interesting to compare and contrast. What do you get? What are the pros? What are the cons from those different sources of money? And feel free to speak freely.
Yeah, well, I can speak extra freely because Tim Porter's sitting right there, and he'll just tell me I'm wrong if he disagrees with me.
We'll call security and have him removed.
I'll hear about it in our next board meeting.
Yeah.
So Madrona locally, Tim, is on our board, and they invested in our first round. And so to contradict myself, they invested when it was basically me in a PowerPoint deck, like talk about vapor, and have followed on with successive rounds. And we also, in our first stage, got Amplify partners from the Bay involved. And then for our Series A, it was Aspect. And the thing that I've anchored on very, very heavily, having been on boards that are good, bad, and ugly, and everything in between, was the quality of the partner. And that is 110% the most important thing. You know, the firm will get you so far in terms of brand recognition and access to customer accounts and BD opportunities. But it's really the quality of the partner that's going to make the biggest difference. And for me, I didn't profile. I did profile a little. I knew I wanted Seattle-based and Valley-based for the first round because I wanted to make sure that for Valley-based, we had a representative in conversations that we couldn't physically or geographically be there for in the early days. And so I knew in the Bay I wanted someone who is going to hustle, someone who's basically sales BD for us, an extension of the team who would go and kick down doors and get us introductions. And here I wanted someone who had great reputation, great network, who could access the large brands that were here in the Seattle ecosystem. And we've got quite a few. And then for the next round, what I was looking for from the partner was somebody with deep operational experience, ideally someone who'd gone from zero to IPO, and that's what we found with Aspect. And Mark Kranak was, he was the first marketing hire at Imperva and the chief marketing officer when they went public. And so at this stage of growth, where we're scaling out all the business functions, it's not just me and an engineering team anymore, we needed somebody who could help us figure out that scale from very early days and then help us see around corners for what we're going to run into in the next phase of growth. So that's what I optimized for, was partner and then geographical dispersion.
How about you, Samir?
Yeah, so we have a very diverse set of VCs. We have Greycroft, who invested us in Series A, is based out of New York and LA, and Fidelity, their VC arm based out of India. Series B was through Ignition, based here. Series 3 was B Capital, which is based out of Singapore. And Series D from Meritech, which is based in the Silicon Valley. So we get a reasonably good view of different kinds of VCs. I think you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, it is the partner that matters. The firm is important, but the partner that matters. So in addition to what you said, looking at the network of the partner at the firm and Ignition, at least for us, and John Connor has been fantastic in opening doors. In fact, we just closed Boeing as a customer, and John actually introduced us to Boeing, and that was fantastic. Strategic insights that you said is very critical, especially in the B2B space. That's very, very important. But I believe the most important thing in selecting a VC, wherever it is cultural fit. Does the partner who's going to be on your board, as well as the firm, match with your values? Because this is a long road, and there'll be lots of ups and downs and bumps. And who do you want in that foxhole with you when you're taking incoming? Or when you rush that hill, you don't want to look over your back. You want that person to have your back. And to make sure that the values match and the culture fit is there is extremely important for long-term sanity of the founders and the health of the company. So focus on the culture as much as anything else is my personal strong advice to you.
Yeah, just adding on what Samir said, I fully agree. I mean, cultural fit is very important. But something with Kristina mentioned, I think you need to look at what stage of the life cycle your company is at, and what type of VC do you need when you are raising a Series A, and what type of help you need. Maybe more somebody could help you with the strategy and product market fit and go to market issues, whereas you become a later stage, the business development aspect, connections and relationships, as well as some operational excellence aspect that, hey, this is how you improve your net retention rate, or this is how you are going to improve your cost per order dollar. And they have a portfolio of companies who have gone through different best practices, and they can share with that. That might be another way to look at it, that where you are in the life cycle of your growth and on what type of investor you want to have.
Great. So I've got a couple questions for each of our panelists. Samir, why don't we start, and we'll have the blockchain discussion to start with. So you're in the contract management business. One of the key promises for blockchain technology is the idea of smart contracts, where they're actually executed in code. You guys have released a toolkit recently. We've been hearing, I don't know about Bitcoin, but I'm very interested in blockchain for 6 or 7 years now. When are we going to see some interesting non-Bitcoin blockchain applications?
Yeah, I think blockchain in our mind, and at least in our space, we believe is going to be much more transformational than even AI in contract management and smart contracts. And I think we are seeing the beginnings of that being applied. We have done a few POCs. We have just released the Icertis blockchain framework. We're working with Daimler. We're working with Johnson & Johnson and Airbus on many POCs. And at the Daimler, that's actually public now, where one of the use cases is, how do you make sure that ethical sourcing is applied in a multi-tier supply chain? So the challenge is you have your tier 1 supplier, Daimler does, and then you can monitor those tier 1 suppliers quite well with respect to ethical sourcing or any policy sourcing that you might have, labor laws, FCPA or whatever the EU parallel is. But how do you monitor tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers with respect to the contracts and with respect to them actually doing what's in the contract with respect to ethical sourcing? And the private blockchain that we deployed with Daimler essentially puts all their suppliers in all the various tiers on the blockchain, and the suppliers submit their contracts to the blockchain. And then what we do is, in the consortium blockchain, is actually we use AI and ML to read their contracts and make sure that every contract in the various tier of the suppliers has the appropriate clauses and provisions that bind them to whatever Daimler wants, Daimler's sourcing policies are. So that's the first step. The second step is, are they actually adhering to the terms and conditions? And the way we do that is, they upload their certificates, they upload whatever audits there are, and then again we use AI to see if those certificates are real, et cetera, et cetera. And then the final level, which we are not involved in, but Daimler actually gets other companies to go and do physical checks. So the sustainable sourcing, ethical sourcing in a multi-tier supply chain using a consortium blockchain in a very anonymous way. The thing that blockchain gives you, which I didn't mention, is that Daimler doesn't actually get to see the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 contracts, which is very important from a confidentiality point of view. Only if there's a challenge, we flag it, saying there might be a sourcing contractual problem in this tier to the supplier who is up tier from them. And that is very important, where confidentiality and privacy is respected, but at the same time, you get what you want with respect to your ethical sourcing policies.
So what's your time frame for when a majority of the contracts in your system are going to be executed on a blockchain?
We don't execute on the blockchain, so that's a little bit different. That's really
Right, so
Bitcoinish.
You're more about immutable data.
That's right. It's
smart
immutable.
contract execution.
You know your blockchain well. That's right. Exactly right. So this is more about making sure that it cannot be, it's submitted, it's immutable, and then it can be monitored from a policy point of view. The transaction is done using e-signature, Adobe e-sign or what have you, completely separate from what the blockchain, at least in this use case, is used for.
Okay. All right, Kristina, GDPR, great for your business? Is it great for society at large? I mean, we're a year in. There's some pretty strong critiques out there in terms of unintended consequences, price of compliance. It's basically reinforced the stranglehold of Facebook and Google on the ad business. A lot of people have pulled out of doing business in Europe. What are we getting?
Ooh, that's good.
No.
That's a meaty question.
Yeah.
Discuss.
Other than the new accept button.
All those notices you keep getting. I'll just give you a little bit of a backdrop. When I was at Ignition, I actually looked for a company to invest in this space for about 2 years and didn't find anything. And the reason I was looking was when I first saw these privacy concerns become general public knowledge, like in the post-Edward Snowden world, where everybody was buying their tinfoil hats and wondering, how do I delete my accounts and why does the government have my data? I read through the first draft of GDPR before it had, years before it had become law. And my first reaction from having spent years at Microsoft and Business Objects and Crystal Decisions was, this is going to be next to impossible to comply with. All of the best practices we've been selling for the last 20 years around data redundancy, backups, geographical dispersion, those are now liabilities under GDPR. And so we're basically saying companies' most valuable asset, their data, is now going to become a liability unless they know what they've got and how they're using it. And so I spent 2 years looking for a company to invest in. I talked to about 50 Fortune 500 companies and asked them the same 5 questions. Is this a problem? How are you dealing with it? What are the technical challenges? Are you using any technology today, or could you repurpose anything to solve the problem? And if I found something, would you pay for it and how much? And across every company, with one exception, certain social media company we all know, they said this is a huge problem we need to solve. And so, about 6 months ago, when a certain someone was testifying in front of Congress, I was having my schadenfreude moment and fully understood the meaning of that lovely German word of taking pleasure in someone else's pain, because that was an incredibly painful thing for most people in the industry. Everything that we have been doing for decades around protecting data, making sure it's highly available and it's resilient and we have backups of it, was now a problem. And when we first started to talk to companies about how they were dealing with GDPR, and then knowing that more legislation was sure to come because public sentiment had changed and was continuing to change, it was interesting because the first knee-jerk reaction was, oh, we should lock it down. And one of our first customers, Orange France Telecom, their reaction was, oh, we lock it down. And if somebody wants to use it, they have to submit a request to the GRC committee. Well, that takes 7 weeks to review. And then if it gets approved, they provision access to a subset of the data for a certain amount of time. And at that point, then someone can run some analysis on the data. Well, how can you be agile to changing market conditions if you have to start planning your marketing campaigns a quarter in advance because you can't access your data? That knee-jerk reaction of just lock it down and don't use it anymore, it's not the right answer. And so what we've started to see as we've progressed and have got other folks on board, large travel and expense companies, telcos, banks, that kind of thing, what we're finding is that they're starting to look at these regulations as a strategic advantage for 2 reasons. One is if they can get a good handle on their data using machine learning and NLP in a product like ours that says you've got personal information here, here, and here. You might have 120 different systems, but only 8 of them have got relevant data. So if you get a right to be forgotten request, you only need to look in those 8 spots, and we can tell you what you've got in those 8 spots and whose data it is. The rest of them really doesn't have identifiable data or anything extremely sensitive. So by scoping that down, they're able to better manage the data that they've got. And as the CISO of a large CPG customer of ours said, every 2 years, the privacy team sends out these spreadsheet surveys and asks people what do they have in their data sets. And every 2 years, those answers come back exactly the same. And I know it's garbage because we acquire companies all the time. We've got data sharing agreements going in and out of the company all the time. People change jobs. There's no reason those answers should be identical unless people are just copying and pasting the last person's work from 2 years ago. And the CISO is sitting there going, I can't do my job if the privacy team doesn't do their job. How do I know who to provision access to, what systems, or what data to move to the cloud, or what network zone to put something in if I don't know what's sitting in my data set? And so the way companies are thinking about this is putting privacy upstream from security, where privacy tells you what's important and why, and security is the how. And by those two things working together in a continuous stream, companies are able to get a better handle on their data, they're able to get a better handle on their risk exposure. And then the second point of why people are seeing this as a benefit is they're starting to use it in some of their marketing and go-to-market. So if they have a really good technology solution that's auditable, provable, defensible, they can start to market that as a differentiator relative to their competition. And that's how a number of our customers are starting to think about it, is that if I do a good job, this becomes marketing for us. And we can say, you don't want to go with those folks over there who abuse your data and who are on the front page of the journal for doing X, Y, Z. We've got these practices in place to protect your data and respect your data. And you want to therefore go with us because we're a more trusted vendor. And that trust is becoming a marketing tool that's helping companies differentiate in the market. And so it's a bit of both, but it's also just...
But if we net it out, your take, GDPR, benefits exceed the costs?
I do as a consumer, for sure.
All right. So what consumer benefits are you getting from GDPR?
People have a better handle on what's there, and they're becoming more aware of what they have. And so in the event of a breach, it's less likely that you're going to have data that they shouldn't have in the first place sitting on the dark web because they've actually gone through the process of understanding what they have and where it is and minimizing it. One of our customers, who shall remain nameless for reasons that will become very obvious soon, acquired a company. That smaller company had data sharing agreements with credit card processors. And in that data, when they acquired it, they dumped it into their Hadoop cluster. And then we show up, we run a scan, and we say, did you know you've got adult content in your Hadoop cluster? And the CTO's jaw was hanging down going, no, why do we have that? And we said, well, this company you acquired, these are the tables, this is where it is, and it came in through these credit card processors, through data sharing agreements that the executive team and the board of the acquired company swore up and down they didn't have that kind of data in the acquisition, but it's there. And did you know that from that adult content you can infer sexual orientation, behavioral data, preferences, things that are 4% of revenue fines under GDPR? And the acquiring company had no idea they had that information. The CTO's jaw was hanging down, and the chief privacy officer was sitting at the back of the room, rocking back and forth, smiling, having an "I told you so" moment, because for years...
Seems to be a lot of that going on in privacy land.
For years, she'd been saying that's an issue. And so if they got breached and that got out, you don't want to be on that list of names of things that were attached to that kind of content. And it could be.
True. All right, Arif. ExtraHop's kind of involved in a transformation. You've gone from what I would describe as wire level monitoring to a higher level solution, applying that to cybersecurity. Tell us about the transformation. It seems to be going relatively well, so I'm not that interested in how great it's going. Tell us what was hard. Tell us what you do differently if you had to do it again. Tell us what you had to give up as part of that.
So security is another use case of our foundation technology. We drive intelligence from all the digital interactions that take place on the network. And from there, we get a sense of how well your applications is running, how well your network is behaving. And then we also use a lot of machine learning to look at the anomalous behavior of applications and users. And our customers were already using, when we polled the customers for ransomware detection and some anomalous DNS server traffic, or even in some cases, they were looking at Active Directory issues. We have a culture in our company which I would say is heavy on gathering voice of the customer. we always go and validate our business strategy as well as product market fit. I don't actually approve anything unless people show that, hey, here are the 5 customers we talked to. So in this case, customers really pulled us and they said, hey, you have a great platform to look at inside the perimeter security. Everybody's looking at the security from endpoint, from outside in, or from perimeters, from firewalls in. But how about quickly detecting a breach or a potential of a breach, and then to be able to investigate and do some response? So that's a new market which is emerging, and for us, it was a perfect fit for our platform, and we decided to double down on that. And by doubling down on means that we made that as a priority. I'm a big believer, actually, last Geek Summit, I talked about a construct of 4 things which I generally use whenever I make a transformation or start a business, which is strategy, structure, staffing, and systems. Staffing is talent, and systems are processes. So we validated our
Better when they're all S's.
when they're all 4 S's. Right. Yeah, exactly. So we validated our strategy that, hey, this is a growing market, multi-billion-dollar TAM, very defined budgets. Actually, the audit committees are now assigning and asking the companies to set aside budgets to make sure that you can quickly detect a breach and minimize the damage. And that's where we come in. We also looked at the structure and then started to say, hey, I have a direct sales force, I have a land and expand model, but they don't call the security guys, so how do I augment my go-to-market model? So we implemented, for a temporary purposes, a overlay organization and hired people from all the security companies we could, so that inside the company we now have a vernacular and a vocabulary to go and call the CISOs and the SOC leaders. We also knew who we are going after, and we structurally implemented a very strong ABM and outbounding capability so that we can target all the CISOs in 3 verticals we are very dominant in, to make sure that everybody has heard about us. And then lastly, the thing which we are finding very critical is the customer success aspect. And we have invested quite heavily to make sure that there is stickiness with our solution, and then the customers follows our land and expand model. The challenges which I said was, one was to talent, to make sure that we have security people in organization. We also moved from more perpetual and physical subscription model to SaaS model, which does require a different type of measurement. The focus was not on gross margins and large deal size, but more on net retention, speed of customer acquisition, and all that. So we'll have to change our outlook from that regard as well. But overall, I mean, it's a progress we have been, you said we shouldn't talk about progress, but we are very excited about it. Has quadrupled our TAM, and the growth rate has gone up, and we are very, very excited about this space.
So what would you do differently if you had to do it again?
I think I would have doubled down a little bit more on, we are not known in this space, in the security space. And some of our competitors, which are heavily funded by some large VCs, if you go and look at Economist Magazine or go to JFK, they have got advertisements everywhere about their name. They're losing massively money, but they are spending quite a bit on awareness. I think if I would have to do something different, I might have put more money in marketing and awareness.
All right, good for those ad people offline. Since we're at the Cloud Summit, we should probably talk about Cloud some. And 2 of the hottest concepts in cloud these days are hybrid cloud and multi-cloud. I mean, it's really a big shift in the last year. Amazon's gone from dismissing it as wacky and archaic, I think are some of the words they used, to now they've embraced it. I'm curious what you're seeing as people who sit up above the infrastructure level. What are customers telling you about deployment models? How do they want to deploy things? What are you seeing?
I'm sure my colleagues can have more experience there, but I can tell you from more regulated industries, we find are the ones who are moving towards a hybrid cloud model. They have, I was in just Europe and I was surprised, and I visited a couple of banks, and they still have decided not to move their data to the public cloud and are building and investing in private cloud, which is still a good news for us because they will buy our gears. But I was surprised. So I think as the industry is more regulated, we see a little more conservativeness on their part, but they are definitely experimenting and say, okay, I'm going to keep most data on-prem, but I'm also going to move some on the cloud. So we're seeing that factor. And the second one is those who were the early adopters to cloud, we are seeing them moving more towards multi-cloud. They already have a good one cloud in place. They have taken out all the difficulties, the kinks and the difficulty they would have for this transition. And now they're saying, okay, I don't want to be locked down to one. And they are saying, okay, now let me bring another cloud. So
And
the early
what's the
adopters,
motivation for adding that second cloud?
I think they don't want to be locked down to just one vendor.
All right. Christina?
So given the sensitivity of the data that we're working with, the vast majority of it is still on-prem. I would say 95% of it. And most customers we're dealing with want some form of hybrid deployment where part of it's in the cloud, part of it's on-prem. They're all moving to the cloud, but they haven't moved the majority of their data because very few large organizations who are our target market were actually born in the cloud, were created in the last 10, 15 years, where being a born in the cloud enterprise was actually even possible. So we're finding hybrid for us is on-prem and cloud, and it's almost always multi-cloud for the exact same reasons. They don't want to have vendor lock-in. And so it's typically a prioritization exercise of where are you most worried? Where are you most concerned? What are your top business priorities? Okay, we'll start there. And so everything we do has to be hybrid in every sense of the word.
Great. Samir?
Yeah, slightly different for us since we are a productivity app or platform. Most conversations are not about the cloud you're in. It's most conversations are what does your app do? And they're reasonably
And that's
indifferent.
just because your application is opaque, the implementation details.
That's right. So they're reasonably indifferent as to what cloud we are on. The data, though, sometimes, especially extremely sensitive contracts, they do want it placed in a special place. And the special place could be in some lockbox, in a cloud, or on-prem, et cetera, et cetera. But the fear of the cloud and fear of having data in the cloud, we don't sense that much anymore. With respect to hybrid cloud or multi-cloud for us, we are born in Azure. We bet on Azure in 2010 when it was called Red Dog, I think. You might remember that. And we are, of course, Microsoft, very close partner, a great partner of ours. But the way the product was designed, we could and we did port to GCP in 4 weeks.
And what was the impetus to port?
One of our customers wanted it on GCP,
And why did they want it?
because they own GCP.
Okay. Got it. There are only a couple of those kind of customers out there.
That's right. So and we ported it. So the beauty of sort of implementing and the way Monish Darda, who is our CTO and my co-founder, is especially going to GCP or AWS is not that hard if you do it right. Now, if you're based on Salesforce, I think you're kind of locked into Salesforce. You cannot take the Salesforce implementation and move it to Azure or AWS or GCP. So caveat emptor there.
Yeah.
But yeah, from our perspective, it's cloud is not that interesting unless the person owns that cloud and wants it to be.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about
There was
those.
one thing I was going to add here. Even though some of the customers don't have crisp plans on when they're going to move the workloads to the cloud, but when we sell our solution, the first thing they always ask, do you have a cloud-based solution? And then we ask them, when do you need it? Oh, then we don't know, but
Maybe
we want to
never,
make sure.
but-
Yeah,
but it's
but
an
as an
optionality
insurer, we
thing.
want to
Yeah.
make sure that you can also monitor and secure the workloads, whether they are on-prem or in the cloud. So it's like a checkbox to have for us
Yeah.
at least.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the big hyperscale clouds. So the scale of AWS, Azure, GCP is just amazing. I mean, these are global computers that bestride the planet, and everybody else is kind of in orbit around them. So we heard about your platform decision, but it'd be interesting to hear how you made the decision for which cloud you're on. Been a lot of disclosures in recent IPOs about how much people are paying the cloud vendors for hosting. How do you think about costs? How do you think about where you want to put your service?
Well, for us, it was pretty easy in the beginning. It was who is giving us free compute.
Yeah, but they all give you free compute, right?
They all
You can go from cloud to cloud.
Well, and that's exactly what we did. We started off on Azure, used up all of our free credits, and we went to AWS, used up all our free credits. And now I think we're mostly on Azure most of the time. And that's because we just became COSA ready and we're looking at them for go-to-market partnerships. That said, we're Dockerized, so it really doesn't matter.
You're mobile?
Yeah,
Ready
we're
to
mobile.
roll if need be?
Yeah,
All
we've
right.
got our homes on our backs. We'll go where your data is, and that's part of our value prop is
Sure.
95% of your most sensitive data is on-prem will go to you, and we put our data processing pipelines on-prem. UI layer might be in the cloud, or it might be on-prem. It's really up to the customer. And so we just go where the customer goes, and we're
You gotta
pretty agnostic.
Go to the data. What about ExtraHop?
Yeah, we started with AWS, like, it's just, they have the first mover advantage. As they say, you can never go wrong by buying from IBM. So we started there. But since our focus is more enterprise customers, we are seeing a lot more pull from our customers to make sure that our tools are available on Azure as well. We are looking at GCP as well, just because it seems like from ecosystem and integrations point of view, there might be a little bit more flexibility there. Eventually, we will have it on every cloud because we don't want to just be limited to one aspect, because our customers have workloads everywhere and they want to secure it.
Yeah, I think for those who are trying to make a decision today, all these cloud vendors with respect to technology and pricing will be the same. It'll in the long term, it'll 6 and half a dozen of the others. So you really have to think about what do you get more from the platform vendor, and especially a company like Microsoft, which is, I think, completely agree with you with respect to the co-sell motion that they have. Is a very partner-centric company, as Charles, that you know, and they're very big and going to market with partners. So what incremental sort of value does this partner bring to the table besides technology and price, which I think eventually it'll be commodity, is a very critical decision that you have to make today. And I believe that Microsoft is probably leads in that, and they're local, of course, so it helps there. The other thing is if you have a global business, and 40% of our business is North America, 40 is Europe, and 20 is APAC, you got to go with somebody who has data centers around the world. You have to, because given the political situation, in Europe, they want all their data in Europe, as you can imagine. In APAC, it's either in Singapore or Australia. We don't have any customer in China yet. So that will be another different conversation with customers in India, and they want data there. So to go with a platform vendor is investing substantially in data centers. And I believe the number I heard from Microsoft is they're spending $5 billion a year in building data centers.
Closer to 10.
Now 10. Now think about
And
10.
that's true for all the big cloud guys.
Yeah, exactly right. So pick somebody who can have that sustainability with respect to spending around the world, because if you're going to go global, those countries, those companies in those countries are going to say, hey, the data needs to be close to me and not in the US. So that was a big sort of another big reason why we picked Azure, and something I'm sure AWS also provides for GCP.
So, they're technology hosting partner, distribution partner. What about competition? My experience with platforms is they tend to move up the stack over time. Do you worry about that at all? Is there anything you're doing to protect yourself against that?
Yeah, I can take that. Having worked there and then also partnered and et cetera with them, they tend to go up the stack for their stack. They don't tend to go up the stack for other people's stacks. And so for us, supporting technology like Databricks and whatever else in the Azure ecosystem that's the latest, Hortonworks. We also look at everything else that's out there, because there's no company who's a Microsoft-only shop. And so even if they do enter into the space, there's still,
So there's a heterogeneity.
Yeah, there's a heterogeneity play.
I think the multi-cloud is a good news for us, because then the customer would need to have a vendor-independent tools. And if they're just stuck with one CSP, then they'll have to use their built-in tools. So one is that. The other thing is, I think it also, for a startup, innovation is everything in the technology world, and that, I think, makes sure that our roadmap and technology development is ahead of where some of these large CSPs could be, and that the whole concept of best of breed comes into play. So I think it's forces us to make sure that we are innovating, and then our tools are ahead of what are going to be generically available. So multi-cloud and innovation both is our defenses.
Yep, that's been a playbook that's worked pretty well in the past. Let's change gears and talk a little bit about AI and ML. There was a story in the Financial Times a month or two ago about 40% of the AI companies in Europe weren't actually doing any AI. I assume they were doing GDPR compliance, but I know all three of you are investing in AI and ML. It'd be great to hear what you're doing and what material benefit it brings your customers.
So a religious question, joke or question, don't mind it. What was the first contract in the history of mankind? The Ten Commandments. Anyway, it had all the trappings of a contract because it told you what to do. It had unlimited liability. It had it had provisions for curing, anything that you sort of don't keep up your SLA or what have you. But the reason I say that is contract management is a very old space. And one of the challenges of contract management has been, which has been very recently sort of cracked, is contracts were never digitized. They were PDF'd for signatures or what have you, or storage, but nobody knew how to look inside, how to crack that contract open. And then how do you look at the provisions and the clauses, and how do you make sense of those? And this whole digitization wave that hit, maybe 5-7 years ago, and the AI ML wave is completely revolutionized how contract management and contracts are looked at. Because today, what we can do is we can actually look at a contract and give you all the various provisions, your obligations, your entitlements, your liability, indemnity, et cetera, and then match it against what your standards are and give some sort of a score about what the risk is or how much exposure you have to that particular provision. You couldn't do that before. And then if you can take all of that and then match it to your delivery systems, you can actually tell today how your contract is performing, whatever is enshrined in the contract is performing vis-a-vis what's happening in the real world. So how
do you get those inputs in? How do we
integrate,
find out what's going on the progress side?
Yeah, so and there's another question you had, and I think you'll ask later, but I'll go there anyway. The platforms like ours are very deeply integrated into the enterprise, right? We're the customer of ours that we integrate into 27 systems of theirs. These are delivery systems, compliance systems, ERP, et cetera. So they actually bring that data into our platform and then match it up with what's actually in the contract to see how the contract is performing. So there is substantial amount of ingress and egress of data from our platform.
But it's a lot of work to tee that up for every contract you do. What is implementation
and
look like?
Tremendous implementation times can be between 6 months to a year, but there's tremendous value in it, right? Means at the end of the day, every dollar into a company and every dollar out of a company is governed by a contract. And if you don't know what your contracts say, it is one of the biggest risks, unknown risks, that you're taking that you don't have to take anymore. And so the value that you get long term by investing in these integrations and deploying a platform with AI like ours is reduced risk, higher compliance, and even more importantly, more value. I'll give you a simple, BCG, by the way, is a partner of ours. They're LP in B Capital, which is an investor of ours. And so we work with BCG very closely. One of the BCG clients wanted to know what the payment terms are and if they're adhering to payment terms or the suppliers are adhering to payment terms. And we actually used AI to look at the payment terms of all their suppliers, and from a cash flow point of view, saved them substantial amount of money because they were paying faster than they should, or they were collecting later than they should. And just simple things like that can save you actually a lot of money as long as you can crack that contract open and you can get what is in the contract and actually apply it to real world to make money.
Okay. Kristina, GDPR, how does AI?
Your product sounds cool. I don't know why I'm nerding out on it. I'm like, ooh, contract management. That sounds awesome. From our standpoint,
It is the Salesforce of contract management. That's what we are.
That's what it is.
Remember, grass looks always greener on the other side.
TM.
I'm sitting here going, I want to know more about how your product works. So from our perspective, most of the people who talk about AI, they're talking about it in terms of an umbrella term, but they're not actually doing AI.
I've seen some of that.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of people are using it as a category header, and really it's a continuum. You've got AI, NLP, ML, regex, lookups. And, even if people are doing
marketing, probably
Yeah,
at the
and
far
marketing.
end of the continuum.
and in decreasing level of complexity. And when we're looking out in the market, we're looking at what people are actually doing. They're not doing AI. I could count on maybe one hand the number of companies that have got enough data to genuinely do AI. They are monstrous companies that are constantly crawling the internet. And then you can do real AI on that amount of data and get something that's truly valuable. I think it was HighSpot was just talking about overfit based on the data sets in the previous session. And, I'm kind of chuckling because I'm thinking, yeah, that's right. If you start training a model on limited data, you're going to end up with overfit to red herring kind of information. You need massive seas of data to really do that well and have the algorithms trigger things that are actually sensical. And so from our perspective, we don't talk about AI, we talk about ML and NLP. Regexes and lookups, depending on what data we're looking for. Like if we're looking at credit cards, it's straight up a regex. If we're looking at names, it's a lookup. For other things like figuring out is the name Jordan a river, a shoe, a country, that's NLP. And so there's different combinations of what we use depending on the data that we're looking for. And we're just very upfront about it. And it's funny because we typically deal with chief technology officers and SVPs of data management, data infrastructure, and they're not fooled by marketing. And so if we walk in there and we're like, we're doing AI, they're going to look at us and go, and there's the door. And so
Usually there's one follow-up question, then the door. But
That's right. So we're just very honest. It's a category header.
Okay. ExtraHop.
Yeah, there is a lot of marketing going on in AI, and I agree with Kristina. Many companies who claim AI actually are doing ML maybe, and if those who claim ML, they might be doing a little bit of statistical analysis and claim ML. We have invested heavily, and I'll tell you 2 reasons why we have been investing in data science and machine learning is, one, there is a huge shortage of security practitioners. And the amount of data which they have to sift through and to be able to look at anomalous behavior is enormous. So you have to deploy some advanced technology to be able to compensate for this shortage of skills, as well as the overload people are getting with data and alerts. And that's where the machine learning comes in. And that is, I would say, an essential piece. Without that, we would not have our security platform, because we look at anomalous behavior of users and applications and benchmark it against how the standard should be, and to be able to alert. And then the quality of alerts also depends on how good your algorithms are. So for us, the machine learning is just very, very critical.
Yeah, if you're looking at every packet, you probably need to filter that a little bit. We got a few more minutes left. Instead of me asking more annoying questions, why don't we take less annoying questions from the audience? Hopefully less annoying. Any questions? Really? There we go.
So in the multi-cloud environment, and it seems like everybody's neutral. It's all equally good. The cloud vendors can do this well. How does the liability fall out for the customer? Does it matter anymore? If one process is another, if something does go wrong, who's on the hook?
Well, in our world, yes.
The question was, in a multi-cloud world, who is ultimately responsible if something goes wrong? And I made a gesture like that.
In our world, it does matter because of the concept of data controllers and data processors. So if you are the ones who own the data, you can manipulate it, you can access it whenever you want, you're the data controller. If you're using a third-party tool like AWS or Azure or Salesforce to host it, they're the data processor. And under GDPR, you're jointly and severally liable for breaches, for violations. If someone says, I want to be forgotten, you have to delete it from both your system and make sure that the data processor has deleted it from theirs. And so it does matter. With tools like Azure, with platforms like Azure, they were the first ones to be able to provide a physical address for what data center your data was sitting in. AWS was about 6 to 12 months behind. They could do that now. But the reason that's important is data residency laws around privacy. You have to be able to know what country someone's data is physically sitting in. I think you mentioned that as well with contracts. And so without the ability to say, oh yes, you've got European data sitting in only European data centers, it's not sitting in a data center in China or the US, without the proper protections, it does matter. And so from a legal privacy standpoint, it can make a big difference. That said, commoditization of platforms is kind of a moot point at this point. Between AWS and Azure, which are the only two we really consider, I think we've had one company with GCP so far. Out of those two, it doesn't matter. They've caught up to each other.
Other questions?
It's another hybrid question, but you mentioned talking about how all the platforms tend to move up the stack. I'm curious how you balance things like containerization and deploying across all the different platforms versus special tools that exist only on single platforms, like kind of refactoring the lowest common denominator when you go hybrid. How do you feel about it? What are you?
So just to restate the question, is you're architecting for multi-cloud or hybrid cloud, are you doing least common denominator, or are you taking advantage of specific features on different clouds, unique features on different clouds?
I can take that one again. We're being forced to take more features on specific clouds. So for instance, adopting Kubernetes with customers where they've made a bet on Azure. They're asking for AKS specifically. And so we have to figure out how to architect for that. And then what's the comparable on AWS, which is the next phase of what we have to do after that. And so we are starting to see, we did take a lowest common denominator approach of it's Docker and we couldn't care less what other services you're using. And now customers are now saying, no, we want you to use this because this has been approved by our security department and it's the only approved thing. And to get something approved will take 12 months. And we're sitting there going, well, it would take us 1 month to build it. So we're just going to go and do that. And so we're starting to get forced down that line. I think there's a point in the future, probably 12 months from now, where we're going to have to take a hard bet. And that hard bet is largely going to be based on what the majority of our customers are using, and then also go-to-market support from the vendor and what they can do to help us bring them into more deals if we take a bet on more of their stack.
Anybody else? All right, other questions? John Cook. Oh, all right. All right, there we go.
So you talked about partners in the context of go-to-market or technology vendors and partners. How do you, what's the full spectrum of your partner ecosystem and how do you use them for whether it's deployment or ongoing customer success or advisory, business process improvement? So what do you do yourselves versus what you build your partner ecosystem to provide to customers?
So what do you get from the platform? What's
Yeah,
the
so
full scope of that?
So I'll tell you what our relationship with Microsoft. My relationship is 360 degrees. So they are a customer of ours. We are a customer of theirs, and then we have joint customers. Many a times they would give us a referral to a customer, but in most cases they help us in deals because Microsoft really has every customer, every enterprise and customer has some Microsoft product in it. So they help us in winning the deal, because if we win the deal, then Azure wins deal, and their consumption goes up. A lot of co-marketing, a lot of events, a lot of webinars, et cetera, and engagement at the rep level in the various districts in Microsoft and subsidiaries, I guess, outside in the U.S., the districts in the U.S. and subsidiaries outside the U.S. So it does take a lot of investment because the way federated company. A lot of decision. I mean, there is strategy that comes from Redmond, but a lot of implementations are geographic in various countries, or at least in the regions as they call it. So you really have to go out and meet the various sellers and the various general managers and the various subsidiaries of the regions and form those relationships so that they actually bring you into deals, or you know them a priori when a deal matures in their country, that they engage, as opposed to tell me who you are now. So it's a big investment, and you do have to do it over a period of time. It took us a couple of years before it came to fruition. We have to stay at it, and it will, in the long term, pay dividends.
Yeah. I think the common model is along the lines Samir mentioned, that you have technology partnership with them, as well as co-marketing and co-selling, and now we are seeing big emphasis on part of the CSPs to work with your channel partners and have them to be able to quote through the marketplace. The thing which we are looking for is, in security, there is not only one tool which helps you to secure the whole attack surface, but you have to integrate with many other products as well as services. And can the CSPs play a role beyond being a hosting service, or can they become a fabric for ecosystem service delivery, and would they make it easy for us within the cloud environment to be able to integrate with other products and provide a much better and compelling experience to our customers? I think that would be the next frontier, other than co-marketing and co-selling.
All right. Thanks for attendance. Thanks to our panels. Lunch is downstairs.